Well, the Lord informed me this week, in fact, yesterday, something very alarming, and that was that this is the last night of our marriage series. I was already coming to a conclusion, but He just made it very clear that this was the last night, and so we're going to be rounding out this study tonight. Before I get started in that, I want to share the miracle with you, and after Gina's story, I almost don't want to tell it, because it's kind of a joke. I was ice fishing Friday, and I caught a fish without any hook in his mouth. Now, it originally had a hook in his mouth. I'm not going to go into great detail, but I was fishing with Tom, and my fish got around his line, and it came up in my ice hole, and he went to set the hook, and it ripped the jig out of my fish's mouth, and my fish just started swimming because he thought he was free, and he flopped right up on the ice with no hook in his mouth. That's what you could witness if you go ice fishing with me. I'm just saying. I can't even claim that I caught it, It didn't even have a hook in its mouth. But anyway, so we're going to be concluding this whole thing. And, we've had, I don't know about you, but oftentimes when I step into moments like this, discussions like this, topics on very sensitive subjects, oftentimes it's when we press into these hard issues that we actually start experiencing some hard times in our marriages when we start to press into marriage. I don't know if you've experienced that. When we were in marriage ministry with Family Life, I remember them saying at the conferences on Friday night, just plan on having one really good fight this weekend. Because no matter how good your marriage is, you're going to come to a point to where there's something that you haven't dealt with. There's something that's just kind of been swept under the rug. And I hope that even through all of the ups and downs of what you may have been experiencing through this series, that you have found some hope. You've found some things that will help you and understand God's purpose and plan for your marriage, that it goes outside of reproduction and pleasure and happiness even that is fleeting. As we come here tonight, we've covered all kinds of topics. But when it comes down to it, we still have to go home every single week, every single day, and every single night and live this out. And live out this calling on our lives to move toward oneness, all these things that we've talked about, that if we're not moving toward oneness, we're moving toward isolation, and that God's purpose for our marriage is that we would tell the truth about Him, because our marriage is a picture between Christ and His church. It's a picture of that, and it's either going to tell the truth about it or it's going to tell a falsehood. And so even as we're rounding this series out, you may be even scratching your head going, oh, this is great, Peter, but still kind of stumped. And my question for you tonight is, who is your coach? That may seem like it's coming out of left field. When you play any kind of sports, that coach is the one that you look to for direction. That coach is the one that you turn to when you're hitting hard times or you're getting beat down on the field and you just don't know what to do, and he says, here's what to do, pat you on the rear end and get you back in the game. Who's your coach? Who are you looking to help encourage you? I would hope at some level you might come to me, Joanna, Alex, Rachel, somebody that you trust and know in the church to help you. But ultimately, who do we answer to? We answer to the Lord. I used to work with a gentleman at Family Life, and he had played professional football in the NFL, and he'd played for several teams. But he had this analogy, and I want to use that analogy to kind of paint the picture for us tonight as we round this out. See, he was a quarterback. In fact, he got to play backup quarterback for Joe Montana on the 49ers, which I thought was pretty cool. But he said when they went into, spring training, they took the quarterbacks and they took them over into this room over here to train them on what they expected of them. And basically, what they expected of that quarterback was you were expected to, as a quarterback, to put that ball within a 1 foot by 1 foot spot on your receiver's chest or just in front of him to where he can catch it. That was your job. That quarterback's job was to put it exactly where that wide receiver needed it. And you worked every day to be able to have the precision to put that ball where it needed to be. Now, the other part of the story is that the wide receivers are over in another room. And the wide receivers are being told a little bit different story. Because what happens in the heat of the moment in a game? Sometimes you're flustered and you're dropping back and you got guys that are bigger than you coming at you and you can panic. And you might not be able to put the ball exactly where it needs to go. So you just lob it. The wide receiver school, guess what they taught them? I don't care where it's thrown to. I don't care what he's done, right or wrong. You catch it. And that's what they were taught. So one's being taught, you've got to hit this spot. The other one's being taught, wherever it is, wherever it goes, you catch it. And this guy would use that analogy when he talked about marriage. And so as we kind of finish this out and we go out into our lives to start living this out day by day, think about that analogy. Sometimes you're going to feel like the quarterback, and sometimes you're going to be in the position of the wide receiver. Because sometimes I'm delivering something to Joanna, and other times I'm trying to receive something from her. The whole intention here, guys, is to say whenever you're delivering, try and do it in the exact way that you need to. Because when we falter in that area, it makes it harder to receive, right? But if we're the ones that are receiving, it doesn't matter how it's thrown. It doesn't matter how it's said. It doesn't matter the tone. It might not even matter the words that come out of the mouth. What they're trying to express to you, your spouse, or any other relationship for that matter, what they're trying to express to you is, I have something wrong. You might have hurt me. And even though I'm lashing out at you right now, I need you to just hear me. I need you to receive what I'm saying. I need you to try and catch whatever I'm throwing at you. There's two examples in Scripture. One for a godly woman that just has always stood out through the test of time. It's been used even to start ministries that are named after the chapter in Proverbs, the Proverbs 31 woman. And as I was reflecting on Proverbs 31 to kind of talk about what the almost perfect godly woman would be, because that's really what that chapter is looked to get that example of. There's also hidden in that chapter, if we look at that's the character of the woman, what does the character of the man have to be to allow her to be that godly? And as I thought about from a man's perspective, what is a list of really characteristics that a man needs in his life to be the man that he needs to be the man that his wife needs him to be? And my mind went to Ephesians 5. Quite frankly, in Ephesians 5, there's just a couple of verses for women, and the main theme is submit. And what I'm going to read in Proverbs 31, I believe, is the example of a woman who is submitting and working with, hand in hand with a husband that has treated her well and is married to her and treats her in a way that glorifies God. So men, if we were going to handpick and have described to us the perfect woman, it might go something like this. Look in Proverbs 31, verse 10. And this is a long passage, and we got to understand that at the same time this is the passage, there's a lot of cultural things. I'm not necessarily going to suggest you go buy beads and make things and sell them in the open market, although there's a lot of us here that do stuff like that. So there's some cultural things in here too, but I want to go through this, and I want to kind of touch on some things here. It says here in verse 10, an excellent wife who can find? She is far more precious than jewels. I should have said this in the beginning. This part of Proverbs is being written by the mother of the king. And she's basically coming to him and saying, if you're going to go find a wife, a good wife, a godly wife, this is what she should be like. And right out of the gate, he's saying that a good wife is priceless, is a gem of immense worth. The heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. There's a lot being said in these verses, and what I see there in that verse is she lives her life in such a way that her husband trusts her, but there had to have been a trustworthy husband. Because her response to a trustworthy husband is to be trustworthy, and then in turn, because of her and her character and her presence in the community, it benefits the husband. It benefits the family. She does him good and not harm all the days of her life. I would have to say that in our culture today, that verse right there is one that is violated in our culture greatly, especially when we talk about TV shows and what we tune into. That is where a lot of us, at least it may not be where we want to say, hey, this is where I get my example from marriage, but it's the example that we see a lot if we watch a lot of television. And for the most part, the husband in most television shows is a buffoon, and the wife just puts him down like he's a fool. It says here, a good wife does him good and not harm all the days of her life. Why would she do that? If she harms him, guess what? She's really harming herself. But she's also doing good to him because the hidden message there is he has done good to her. You see, in a godly marriage, this is not like we talked about the worldly example of you do your part and I'll do mine. You go halfway and I'll meet you halfway. Said that week whenever we talked about the world's plan for marriage, anybody that says they'll meet you halfway, one of you is going to be a bad judge of distance. You have to give 100%. And even when she lobs that thing and it's flying way over, you've got to try everything you can to go catch it. And vice versa. She seeks wool and flax and works with willing hands. She is like the ships of the merchant. She brings her food from afar. She rises while it is yet night and provides food for her household and portions for her maidens. She considers fields and buys it, and with the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. I'd have to say that was a really good picture of my mom. For whatever reason, my mom decided that she wanted to stay home. And it meant that we hardly had anything. And we were in a culture and an economy that we could actually do that and make a living. But she was a hardworking woman, and she did everything she could to provide a good... I was eating healthy stuff as a little kid, and I hated it. I wanted all the junk that my friends had, you know, all the cookie cereals and all this. I had grape nuts. My mom made her own granola. I mean, she was a hippie before it was cool, you know. But as I read this, she was dedicated to having a home. To having a home that was there, and she was providing. She was nurturing. If you know women, you know that in men you might need to pick up on this a little bit more, but women were created to nurture and take care of and provide for. It's in their nature. She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands she plants a vineyard. She dresses herself with strength and makes her arms strong. She perceives that her merchandise is profitable. Her lamp does not go out at night. She puts her hands to the distaff, and her hands hold the spindle. She opens her hand to the poor and reaches out her hands to the needy. This is a woman that is just caring. She's so nurturing. She's going to take care of people that aren't even her own. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household are clothed in scarlet. She makes bed coverings for herself. Her clothing is fine linen and purple. Guys, what that is describing there, of course, this is a woman that the king is thinking of, or being described as be a good wife for a king. But if you think about the scarlet and the purple clothing in that day, that was the highest, the best fabrics. You had to be wealthy to have clothes that had color in them. And she's making sure that her family has the best. And I'm not saying be materialistic and go buy all the name brands. It's not the translation here. It's saying a godly woman makes sure that her family has what she needs, what they need. Her husband is known in the gates. This is an important one. And this really speaks to the value of a godly woman. Is her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. In other words, she is not just married to someone that is dignified. If you know any man that has any kind of power and is actually a man of integrity, I guarantee you that his wife has similar qualities, if not the same. Because it's partly the qualities that Joanna has that God uses to etch away at the not so pleasant things about Peter that makes me respectable. That gives me any kind of reputation in the community, because partially it's being married to Joanna that God uses that to push me to be a better man. She makes linen garments and sells them. She delivers sashes to the merchant. Strength and dignity are her clothing, and she laughs at the times to come. She opens her mouth with wisdom, and the teaching of kindness is on her tongue. She looks well to the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children rise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praises her. And this is a quote from the praise. Many women have done excellently, but you surpass them all. How many of you women would love to have your husband say that about you? Would love to have your kids say that about you? Men, how many of us need to say that about our wives? And we don't. This is not supposed to be a guilt trip, guys. This is honestly being able to reflect on what we've done up to this point, because oftentimes I can take Joanna for granted. I can just assume she's always going to do what she's going to do. She's going to do the laundry. She's going to cook for us. She's going to wash all my coffee mugs that I leave in the sink with nasty coffee growing in it. She does that faithfully. But am I going to see her, and not just the value of doing those things for me, but actually realize how she does it, and she doesn't complain about it, and she's a blessing to me? Am I going to recognize her for the blessing that she is? Will your children recognize her for the blessing that she is? And a lot of that lies on our shoulders. The more we praise our wives, the more our kids will not take them for granted either and want to praise them. Charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Give her the fruit of her hands and let her works praise her in the gates. Ultimately, that second to the last line there is at the core of why that woman has all those qualities. I'd love to say that it's because her husband loved her so much. But ultimately, the woman that is being described here is a woman that fears the Lord. So it goes back to my question. Who's your coach? Who do you stand in awe of? Do you stand in awe of yourself and call your own shots and just kind of do what you want to do? Jesus may be this person over here that you believe and you trust Him for salvation, but do you allow Him to infiltrate every part of your life and guide you in everything you do? Man or woman? That's a statement for both. I don't want anybody to hear me reading this and use it as a tool to point at your spouse and go, see, you're not this person. You need to step it up. That should never happen. I don't want anybody coming to me and saying, my husband used this against me. That is not my intent. My hope in pointing this out is this is a picture of who all of us could be, especially, and we'll just use this for women for a second, because it's addressing women. This is who you could be if you're not already. But there's a second part to it. This description, honestly, makes me think of a woman who is a wide receiver, and she catches whatever's thrown at her. Because as the men, God says in Ephesians 5 that man is the head of the woman. That doesn't mean that we're to be dictators. That doesn't mean that we boss them around. That doesn't mean that we use that as a way to manipulate and bully. It means, guys, it is our responsibility to lead our families and to love our wives. And so when I looked at this is possible, one, because she fears the Lord, but two, I guarantee you, she had a man in her life that loved her like Christ loved her. And so I want to look over at Ephesians 5, and I want to go through this. We touched on this a few weeks back, but quite honestly, if we're talking about a quarterback that is kind of the captain of the team, he's the one kind of running everything, he's calling the plays, he's telling who's going to go where and who I'm going to hand the ball off to or who I'm going to throw it to, right? So in your marriage, you're the quarterback. And you're throwing balls out there. You're handing them off. And you can either do a good job of that, put it right in that 1 foot by 1 foot circle, or you can just be chunking stuff out there and then blaming her because she's not catching it. Ephesians 5, and I'm only going to be covering the passage to the man. There's a verse at the very end that addresses them both, but I want to focus on this because it seemed like to me Proverbs 31 lines out, this is somebody that'll catch whatever you throw at them. And quite honestly, men, if we were to do our part and do it well, and our wives truly fear the Lord, they would respond to our leadership. They would respect it. They would want to follow you. Let me tell you something. I lived 8 years in my marriage not doing anything, not carrying any weight. I earned the money, but that was about it. I was addicted to pornography, and my wife is sitting there having to lead our family. And to be honest with you, there's a lot of things that she does way better than I do. But it's not her responsibility to do those things. It's mine. And so when I started stepping up after I got saved and after I started living for the Lord and God started putting our marriage back together, it was hard for her to release some of those things. But in the end, she was really thankful that I finally stepped up and started leading. I want to look at verses 25 through the end of that chapter there in chapter 5 of Ephesians. You've probably read this before. You might even have studied it. But I really want to break this down. And guys, men, look at what God has called us to do. It says here, husbands, love your wives as Christ has loved the church and gave himself up for her. That he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of the water with the word. Men, it is our job to die to self. You say, well, Peter, God calls all Christians to die to self. You're right. But what he's talking about here is that in our marriage relationship, it is so easy for me to wake up in the morning and just be concerned about me and what my needs are and what my wants are. And really if I'm left not in check, I can even steer my family in just whatever I would like to do because nobody else is speaking up. And so it takes me not even asking, hey, what do you want to do? Or what do you think we should do? But being humble enough to put my own selfish desires back and go, God, help me lead my family. I need your power in my life. Help me to know what the right thing to do is. Especially when we have wives that are oftentimes more of a leader than us, more of a natural leader than us. God still expects us to be the leader. Oftentimes we may see things in our wives' lives that, maybe we think they need to change. Maybe we find something in their life that you should work on this, honey. And we find these things because men oftentimes are fixers, aren't we? We like to go, oh, there's a problem. Let's go figure out how to fix the problem. Then let's go fix the problem. The wife doesn't want to be the problem. She wants to be your wife. And by the way, God didn't sanctify us before He died for us. He had to die first so we could be sanctified. And I guarantee you, if you were to die to yourself and put your wife's needs first as more important than your own, any other sin that's going on in her life, any other behaviors that just don't really help the marriage, those tend to kind of come out in the wash as you go through life. Because as you demonstrate Christ's love to her, her heart softens, first to the Lord and then to you. And she's going to be more willing to work with you in that whole submit thing. She's going to be more apt to. Let's keep reading. Here's your job description, guys. Die to self. Sanctify your bride through the washing of the water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, and she might be holy and without blemish. Here's the deal. If you and I are believers in Jesus Christ, we will not stand before the judgment seat of God and atone for our sin. Our sin's been covered. But what we will have to account for is what we did with what we had. And that is the sobering thing about being the man, about being the head. Sometimes we want to be the head just because we want to be the head. But God says, okay, you're the head. So how's your wife doing? How did you end up? How did she end up? Did you lead her well? Did you sanctify her through the washing of the water with the word? Did you lead her spiritually to the point to where God could even more easily transform her life and work in her and grow in her and mature her? Or was your leadership a roadblock for her spiritual growth? I can tell you right now, there's going to be women that are married to men that won't lead them, and they'll still grow spiritually. That's not really the point. God calls men to lead, and He calls us to lead our wives spiritually, and we're going to be held accountable for it. I know this is heavy, like I could hear a pin drop right now, but just stick with me. In verse 28, it says, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. I don't know about you. I don't necessarily love my body, but I make sure I have food. You can tell. I make sure I have my morning coffee every day. I make sure that I'm taken care of. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church. There's two words there, men, that I really think we should latch on to. Nourish. What does it mean to nourish something? You find a sick animal and you can kind of, bottle feed a little baby deer. My uncle found a fawn one time and bottle fed it and painted its antlers orange, and that way eventually it had antlers. That he nurtured it. He made sure it had the food and the water that it needed. And I guess the orange made sure that it didn't get shot. But he nourished it. The picture here that I want you to get from this word nourish, though, is to build up. That's what the Greek word there means, is to build up, to make stronger, to mature. It kind of goes back to the spirit leading spiritually part. To nurture your relationship with your wife to the point to where her relationship with God and with you is stronger. It's more mature. This word cherish, it kind of sounds like this kind of mushy, touchy-feely word, right? I cherish you. It's not quite what it's talking about there. And the Greek meaning of this word is to warm. It gives me the picture of a mother hen sitting on her chicks to keep them warm. Ultimately, it points to protecting. It points to, I need to protect my wife. I need to cherish her enough to where I don't let her heart or her mind or physically come in harm's way. Whether that's through relationships that might be harmful, situations that might be harmful, and especially anything that I might say to her. Because whether we like to admit it or not, men, a lot of the harm that can come to our wives can come straight from us. So we are to nourish and cherish our wives. Why? Because our example, Jesus Christ, is the one that did that for His church. How did He nourish and cherish His church? He had to leave. So He sent another helper. He sends His Holy Spirit to nourish and cherish. The Spirit builds us up to maturity and protects us. Because we are members of His body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. Have you heard that before? It's in chapter 3 of Genesis. First place it shows up, first marriage ceremony. Paul's going back and reminding, hey, you two are on your own. Mom and Dad aren't involved here. Hands off. Cut the strings. You're on your own. Stand on your own. However, he ends with this. He says, this mystery is profound, and I'm saying that it refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. And he ends this whole chapter with that note. And that verse, in and of itself, paints the picture, right, of the quarterback and the wide receiver. Well, you didn't throw it where I could catch it. Well, I'm also supposed to catch whatever you throw. I'm supposed to love my wife as myself. What happens when I don't do that? She should still respect me. There's a test for your marriage. What are you going to do? When you leave here tonight and next week we don't talk about marriage, and maybe you don't have any marriage books sitting on your shelf that you can go to and reference. We've got plenty up there. We brought our whole family life library. What are you going to do? When that ball is thrown at you and it doesn't look like a pigskin, it looks like a porcupine. Are you going to reach out there and grab it? I know that reference, maybe some of you weren't here for that one. Are you going to receive? Are you going to catch it? Are you going to take whatever is thrown at you with grace? That's really what's being pointed at here, is with grace. Joanna comes at me and she's snarling and not in a good mood, and I know it's shocking, but it has happened a time or two. Less than when I do that to her. But how am I going to receive her? Am I just going to go, you know what? I'm not dealing with this right now, and walk off? Am I going to yell back at her? Am I going to bite back at her? Or am I going to go, I have no idea what's going on in her life today. It must have really stunk for her to be in this kind of a mood. I'm just going to hug her. Giving a hug is quite the example of receiving. Because she's coming at me hurling. It's a wobbling pass and it's out of my reach, but I'm going to hug her. It's amazing what a difference a hug can make in a tense situation. She usually doesn't like it at first, but I just hold on. Men, we have got to work on our passing game. We have got to work on our accuracy of our throws. We've got to work on how we are saying and doing everything we do with our wife. And it's something we're going to have to put into practice every day and be intentional about. So this is great. Thanks, Peter. What do I do now? There's 2 books that I would appreciate if you would at least look into and consider reading through every day with your spouse. I know that sounds daunting, but it just so happens there's only 365 pages. It's a 1-year devotional. Family Life had 2 that came out. One's called Moments Together for Couples. And the updated version is called Moments with You. Neither of them are available on Family Life's website. I checked. I tried to order some to have them here ready for us, but you have to find them on Amazon, both new and used. I have a copy of each one here. But what it is, guys, it is a verse. It is a thought, an experience, a life experience that relates to the verse. And then there's some discussion questions and a simple suggestion of what to pray about. So simple. Something that each and every one of us could just pick up and do each day. If we chose to, men, if we choose to want to lead our wives, it's an easy step. So I don't know what to pray for. I don't know what to say when I pray. You don't have to. Sit there in silence for 5 minutes and just pray silently. The point is that you're moving toward oneness. You're moving toward this goal. Because unless we're moving toward oneness, we're moving toward isolation. So remember, even if your spouse is coming at you and it's way out of your target range, just remember that they're not your enemy. You have an enemy and it's not them. Show grace to them. Try and catch whatever they throw at you. But men, it is up to you to lead. Moments Together for Couples by Dennis and Barbara Rainey, and Moments with You is the other one. If you need help, I said this early on, but if you're in a situation, maybe it's not dire straits, maybe you're just trying to figure it out on your own, but you keep stubbing your toe on something you can't even see, come find me and let's talk. It's not a miracle cure, but oftentimes when couples put things off for too long, by the time they end up talking to me, it's already too late. And I don't want that to be the situation with us, all right? So ultimately, who's your coach? Do you fear the Lord? Is He the one that's going to direct you in your lives? And if so, look to God's Word, and these scriptures are just a few that can guide us. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.